Okay, great. Let's get started. So welcome everyone to week 3. Now we're getting into the audiovisual part of your presentation. So this is really exciting for a lot of people. I know a lot of you are excited to get to the most creative part of the class, essentially. I know we've done a lot of creative things throughout, but this is kind of where you get to apply all of the stuff that we've been talking about throughout the month. So really exciting for this week. So what we're gonna do today is I'm going to go through the weekly schedule, and then I am going to hand it over to Professor Irisari. She's gonna go over the discussion board for this week, and then hand it back over to me, and I'm going to go over, or she's gonna go over the discussion board, excuse me, and the first draft submission for this week, and then I'm going to go back over, or she's going to hand it back to me. I'm going to go over the visual aid guidelines and just some tips and tricks and things to think about as you are going through and doing the visual parts of your presentation and putting that together with your audio and creating a video submission for this week. So what does this week look like? We have our 3 main activities for this week. So first we have, just a second. First, we have the learning activity for this week. So same as we've always been seeing, you have your textbook reading, and then you're going to post, this week it's going to be discussing the best visual element that and or content that you've experienced in someone else's presentation, excuse me. And so since we're going to be focusing on visual elements this week, and your reading is also going to be focusing on visual elements, that prompt there is just to have you think about that even a little bit further. So this could be from a TED Talk that you've watched throughout this month, or could be a presentation that you've seen prior to this, maybe a live presentation that you've seen, whatever it may be, but to discuss the best visual part of that experience that you've had with that presentation. Next is a community discussion board. Professor Irisari is going to go into more detail about this in just a few minutes, but the community discussion board is open. It's important to know that the week 3 discussion board is open for week 3 and week 4, because there's a feedback element that it goes along with it with your presentations and peer feedback. So just an important note when we think about due dates is that that discussion board is open all of this week and all of next week as well, okay? And then finally, the 3.4 brand yourself presentation. This is the first draft of our final presentations. I know that sounds, to use first and final in the same sentence sounds a little bit confusing, but those final, we've been showing you throughout the month some, or not showing you, but sharing with you some student final presentations. We showed you that YouTube playlist last week. And that's really what we're aiming for. So those that you have been seeing on that playlist are all final presentations. And so that's what you're gearing up for, is to have that done by the end of next week. But this week, we're going to be working on that first draft. So getting kind of all the bugs worked out, essentially taking your presentation plan and turning that into a video. That's kind of the transformation that we're making this week. So that's what we have due for this week. A little bit less of a workload, just because taking on that first draft can be really time consuming, and you could be working with new things that maybe you haven't been familiar with, like PowerPoint or Adobe Spark or whatever you choose to create your video with. So a little bit extra time to get that stuff done this week. So it's a little bit less of a workload. So I'm going to hand it over to Professor Irisari, and she's going to go over first the discussion board and then on to the first draft of the presentation. So I will hand it over to you, Professor Irisari, whenever you're ready.
Okay, everyone. I hope you're having a good day. Can everybody hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So make sure you're typing. Thank you, Toy. Make sure you are typing any questions that you might have into the chat box as well as we go throughout. We're happy to answer those. So thank you, Austin. For the discussion board, this is your peer feedback discussion board. And as Professor Jarvis mentioned, this discussion board will remain open for all of this week and all of this all of next week, and you are required to contribute to this discussion board. So how will you be contributing to this discussion board? Well, it's a really great opportunity to post an early draft of your presentation to the discussion board, and we're going to talk about the first draft again in just a minute, but go ahead and post that first draft to the discussion board, and that way you are going to be getting feedback not only from either Professor Jarvis or myself, but you will get feedback from your peers as well. So this is how it will work. You will post that first draft. It has to be in video format. So we've been talking about this last week. We're going to continue talking about it this week. It must be in push to play format. And so if you post a YouTube link to the discussion board or an Adobe Spark link, that's a great way to guarantee that everybody else in the class can watch your presentation regardless of the computer they're using or the other technology they're using to access the class site, and guarantee that they'll be able to watch it. It's a great equalizer. Then afterwards, you will be logging into the discussion board, not only to post your first draft, but also to give feedback to your classmates. So a few questions that can help you provide great feedback as you see on the screen. What did you like most about the presentation, and what did you like least? And sometimes it can seem hard to convey feedback about something that someone's not necessarily doing correctly, or maybe something that is not necessarily meeting the class requirements. So I like to talk about opportunities for improvement. But I will tell you that one thing that's not helpful to your classmates, it is not helpful for you to just comment, "Great job." I was in a faculty class recently. It was all about creating really great rubrics of all things. But that's actually something that as a faculty member I'm really interested in. And I had some rubrics I had worked really hard on. I posted them where we were supposed to post them for feedback, and all I got in response was "Great job." I know that there are areas for improvement in what I'm doing. All of you know there's areas for improvement in what you're doing. We're all here to learn. And so it's extremely helpful to convey to each other areas that they can revise or areas of clarity. It's also a good it's also good to point out something that you would like to implement in your own presentation. So if you see something one of your classmates is doing that you think is really neat and really great, go ahead and let them know that, because that is very helpful as well. So you can kind of sandwich that feedback, the sandwich method, where you tell them you like what you like about it, tell them an area for improvement, and then also tell them something that you would like to do in your own presentation. This is going to remain open throughout week 4. We know that these first drafts take a lot of time, they take a lot of energy to create, and so it is likely that we're going to see more posting to this discussion board a little bit later in the week as we get closer to the submission deadline for that first draft. And then we'll continue to see posts to that through week 4, but you are required to contribute to the discussion board by posting a draft of your final assignment, and then also by giving feedback to your classmates. And I know how much your classmates appreciate that, as I've seen some really great feedback in previous semesters. So that is the peer feedback discussion board. You're going to see that for the next couple weeks. So moving on, we're going to talk a little bit about feedback and the RISE model. So we have what is called the RISE model for peer feedback, for giving meaningful feedback to each other. Because a lot of us, as I've said, it's not just helpful to say, "Great job." And a lot of us were never taught how to actually give great feedback. And I think that as college students, and Professor Jarvis and I as faculty, most of us have seen the meme that says, somebody posts to the discussion board, 1 + 1 = 2, and then somebody responds, "Great job. I like how you added 1 and 1 together and got 2. I appreciate how you did that in that example." And we're really, and as funny as that meme is, it's also funny because a lot of people do that. But we are trying to teach you a better way of presenting this kind of meaningful feedback. In online classes, it is very essential for you to really contribute to your classmates' success because you are part of a community, you are making connections within the course. And so this is how the RISE model works. If you're familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, it is aligned with Bloom's taxonomy. So how it works is you start at the bottom. So you want to reflect on how your classmates are doing. So you are going to reference a specific part of what they did. Then moving on from that, you are going to inquire. You're going to ask them for more information, ask them for clarification, point out an area that's not quite clear. If they're using images that look pixelated on your screen, as we all have different screens, this is a great area to mention to them that that might be a picture they need to find a higher quality resolution for. Suggestions. You can offer very specific suggestions to your classmates about how they might want to go back and revise or how they might want to enhance their presentation, even if it's in a small way. What did you think might be a good area for them to improve? Next, we get to the Elevate section, and this is where you can really propose ideas for expansion. So if you watch someone's presentation and you are thinking the whole time, I really love what they're doing, but I would also like for them to expand upon it in this specific area. Or I really think if they're starting this project, that eventually maybe they can expand into this other area. And that is a great way to help out your classmates because it might give them some suggestions that they haven't thought of. So we're really looking for really well thought out, careful feedback. The model that you see on the screen that you can also access through the discussion board page also points out areas that don't meet those standards for the discussion board. So if somebody is just making simple comments saying you did great in this area, you didn't do well in this area, but they're not giving those suggestions for feedback. They're not asking questions about why the student did things the way they did. They're not proposing suggestions for expansion or improvement. That is just not as helpful to your classmates. And it is always helpful to have someone else review your work. It can seem difficult to provide suggestions to other classmates or to receive what some of us might view as criticism, but rather than viewing it as criticism, we need to view it as feedback and incorporate that into what we're doing. All right, Professor Jarvis, do you want to go ahead and advance that slide and we will take a look? When you are receiving feedback, as I've said, don't look at it as criticism. Don't look at it as I haven't done a good job. Maybe you've done a great job, but maybe you missed something small and someone else can point that out to you. So what you really want to do is you really want to cultivate what we call a growth mindset. As I've said many times, because it's so true, we are here to learn, we're learning every day, and we're also here to grow. We're growing in our knowledge, we're growing in our skills, and that's a great way of looking at what others are pointing out to you. It's a good idea to take credit for our mistakes, to focus on areas of self-improvement, to learn from what others are pointing out to you, and to find lessons and inspiration in the success of others. Everyone comes into this class with a different background. Some people may already have a lot of experience with editing videos or editing images, and that can be extremely helpful in a class like this. But if you didn't come into the class with that background, that's okay too, because we have the resources for you to learn what you need to learn and to build upon these skills, which is part of why you are here at Full Sail to begin with. All right, Professor Jarvis, do you want to go ahead and advance that slide? Oh, some more suggestions for how to give feedback. So be positive, be specific, be immediate, provide tough love, but do it in a nice way. So we can point out these areas for improvement, but we can also be kind while we're doing that. And it's overall helpful to all of us. You can think about what your classmates are doing well, and you can think about what your classmates are doing that you would like to incorporate into your own presentation, or maybe you see something that they're doing that maybe they could be doing a little bit better that you realize you could also be doing that better in your presentation. So incorporate those into what you're doing as well. Okay. So now that we've learned all about feedback, let's talk about the brand yourself presentation first draft that we have been talking about a little bit throughout the semester as we've gone along, because this is the project that you will be receiving all of the feedback on. So it provides in the directions a really nice little summary for all of us there, that how we are completing this project, which is the final presentation project for the class. So last week, in week 2, you submitted your presentation plan, and Professor Jarvis and we are working as hard as possible to give you as much feedback as possible on those presentation plans so that you can use that feedback in order to build on what you have learned from the research that you're doing, the behind the scenes research, to implement into your project. Now, I would ask all of you to remember that we told you last week that this presentation plan is not a script. So this should not be a transcript of what you plan to say in the presentation. It should be all the behind the scenes research that you did on the area that you are focused on your target audience for your future career plans, and also on your Full Sail degree program. We need to see all that planning. And then once you've done all the research and all the planning, that's when you put together your first draft that you're submitting this week. So this is week 3, this is the first draft. So many of you have a great start to this first draft and a great advantage, not only from the presentation plan, but from your emotional storytelling videos that you posted to the discussion board last week. If you challenged yourself to use a program like Adobe Spark or a different slide program and then converted those projects into video format, that's going to be a huge advantage for you this week. So this week, you are going to be creating the visuals behind the presentation and then narrating over those visuals to convey your first version of your brand yourself presentation. Creating presentations is very much a revision process. It's very much about receiving feedback from your classmates. So that's this week. And then next week, you will be submitting your final copy. Now, you do have to make your first draft this week and then make changes from your first draft into the final presentation and showing us that you are incorporating our feedback from your first draft, because we are going to be looking at, did you address what we told you to do? So as you develop this presentation, well, hold on one moment, I have to pull my screen back up. As you develop this presentation, make sure you are using examples and skills throughout this that you have learned about throughout this month and including them in the presentation. Very shortly, Professor Jarvis is going to be going over a lot of excellent tips and tricks and skills with all of you that relate to visual elements. So as you can see, that you can use any program that you want to create this project, as long as the final version is in meets the class requirements and is in push to play format or video format. So many of our students use a program like Keynote or PowerPoint or Prezi, and then or Google Slides, and then they convert it over into into video format, which is part of why if you are creating this video, it's a great idea to post it to YouTube and then share that link, because you're guaranteeing that your classmates and your professors can view your video in the format that it is originally intended. So you will not be able to submit just Keynote slides or Google Slides or PowerPoint slides. We need to see you take this a step further and make it into video format. Your presentation must be 3 to 4 minutes long. You don't want to submit a shorter presentation because that's already really short, and you don't want to create a much longer presentation because that doesn't meet the requirements either. I would like you to think about if you've ever heard of an elevator pitch or an elevator speech. If you were in an elevator with someone who had the potential to make or break your future career, and you had just 3 or 4 minutes to tell them something that would inspire them to help change your life, what would you say to them? And I really want you to be thinking about that when you create this presentation. I want you to include star moments. I want you to include information about yourself, include information about what you are going to be learning during your time here at Full Sail. Um, be specific. What classes are you taking? What are you learning from those classes? What are the projects you plan on doing while you're in school? What experience do you have? Don't forget that Professor Jarvis talked about this last week. You are creating this presentation as if you are you of the future when you have graduated Full Sail. So you are going to be projecting forward as if you have already taken all of these classes, as if you have already completed all of these projects and had these experiences. And that's the you who you will be conveying in this first draft, and then of course the final presentation as well. So I will highly suggest that you start by introducing yourself, or make sure that you introduce yourself at some point during the 3 to 4 minutes. Usually closer to the beginning is better. And then convey your message, because it's important for us to know who is giving us this information. And your audience likes to know who you are as you're presenting it as well. Don't forget that we do have that really handy playlist of some amazing final presentations on the YouTube playlist that we have continued to share out to all of you throughout the semester. Those can be a great reference for you as you create this first draft, but don't let it intimidate you, because every one of those students that ended up on the final presentation playlist, they also submitted a first draft. Then they made changes and improvements based on the feedback from the class and from their professor, and then they created the final draft of this presentation to end up on that playlist. So use that for reference, use that to get ideas for what you want to be doing, but don't let it intimidate you, because again, this is your first draft that you are submitting. Does anyone have any questions so far on this Brand Yourself presentation first draft? You can type it into the chat box. You can let us know. Okay, well, if you think of any questions as we go along, let us know. All right, Professor Jarvis. Okay, so I'm going to hand this over to Professor Jarvis, and she is going to be talking to you about some excellent tips for the visual aids that you will be putting into your presentations, and she has some great advice for you. So here she is.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Professor Erie. Sorry. So, Austin, I just saw Austin's comment really quick. So what applications should we use to convert the presentation into video format? There's a couple different ways to do that depending upon what application that you're using. If you're using Adobe Spark, it does it automatically. It exports it as a video. It also gives you a URL that you can submit as well. If you're using something like PowerPoint or or like Keynote if you're on a Mac, or some other kind of slide program. There's a couple different ways to do it. Within PowerPoint, there is an option on the file. If you click on slideshow, a um, a drop down comes down and it says record slideshow or something along those lines. Depending upon what version that you have, it says something slightly different. But the one that I have, it says record slideshow, and you can do it that way. The other way that you can do it is you can do you can use a screen recording application. So for example, on my Mac, I have QuickTime, or there's like free screen recorders that you can get online. And you can do it that way as well. So you can record your screen, it'll record what's on your screen, and it'll record your audio narration as well. So that's a couple of different ways to go about doing that. Another way, if you have a video editing software, like for example on my Mac I have iMovie. I don't know what the equivalent is on a PC, or if there is an equivalent, but anyway. And
There isn't.
oh, there isn't. Okay. But one way that you can do that is, and I've done it before, is I've created a slideshow. I've saved that slideshow as individual images. It gives you, PowerPoint and Keynote give you that option. So when you save it and export it, I think when you export it you can export it as JPEGs, and it'll save them as each slide as an individual file. Do it that way. And then what I do is I take those individual files and I put them into iMovie, just put them in order, and then I can record my audio underneath them and manipulate the timing and all that fun stuff. Of course, you have to have a little bit of experience when it comes to using a video editing software, but that's just another option. So there's a lot of different options out there. For those of you that are like very beginners, like I don't know what I'm doing at all, I would recommend heading towards Adobe Spark. Those of you that are familiar with PowerPoint or other slide softwares, then use those. That's totally fine too. Yeah, and then you always have the backup of lynda.com, like we talked about on our first day. That is a great it's the website that has all of the technical tutorials in it. So you can learn how to use PowerPoint. You can learn how to use, I haven't looked in there if iMovie's in there or one of those types of things, but maybe that's in there too, but how to use these softwares as well. And then there's always YouTube as your backup there too. If you type in, creating a video in PowerPoint, I'm sure you're going to get 1,000 tutorials on that as well. So just make sure that you're using those resources to your advantage. Okay, cool. So if you guys have any other questions, put them into the chat box. We will be diligent in helping you out with those. Let's see. George is asking about the final presentations. We've been sending out the link in our follow-up messages, so it's not on the platform. It's actually in a YouTube playlist. So that's where those live, the example final presentations. And we can share those. I can share those again with you guys towards the end of class too. I can bring up YouTube and share that with you too. Okay, so going into visual aid stuff, visual part of your presentation. So we want to think about kind of just getting us into the mindset here of sorry, I'm reading the chat box as I'm doing this. So the lineup for your class, Mary's asking, how can I get the layout of the classes for our major? If you go to fullsail.com, I want to say, let me see. I know you can't see this, but I'll show you my screen in just a second.
I apologize, everyone, as well. For some reason, I am not seeing the most recent comments in the chat box, but I think I've figured that out now. So
Okay.
Thank you, Professor Jarvis, for answering those questions.
No worries. Professor Erie, sorry, can you see the Full Sail website?
Yes, we can see the Full Sail website.
So go on fullsail.edu, and then down here, these little icons, you can see recording, gaming, blah, blah, blah. So let's say that you're in the film and television program, and then you just click on whatever program that you're in. So let's say I'm in the film bachelor's degree, and then this right here will lay out, where are we? There's a place on here, let's see. Of course highlights here, but there is a place to look at all of it. And now am I just needing to scroll down more? I have a link. I've shared a link with it in my follow-up message from last week. And now I have part of my screen blocked. Oh, okay, here we go. Sorry, I had this part blocked on my screen, this little arrow. I couldn't see it. So just click on that little arrow there. It was blocked by the chat box. And then you have your course schedule. So this outlines every single course that you're going to take in this film program, and then you can click on each one of them. So let's say composition and visual design, click on that one, and then it gives you exactly like the course description. So you can do that with every single course that you're going to have within whatever program that you're in. Okay, so that's how you would find that. Yep. Okay, so let me go back to, there we go. So setting up the visual aid kind of discussion. So I want you guys to imagine you're driving down the highway and you see a billboard on the side of the road. And you know, you're driving like 65, 70 miles an hour, whatever it may be. You only have about between 3 to 5 seconds to view that billboard and make sense of the information that's on it, right? So we see a billboard, we look at it, and we think, you know, oh, this pertains to me, or it doesn't pertain to me, or that's interesting information, this might not be interesting information, or whatever it may be. And so you want to think about the amount of time that you have to view that billboard, process the information, and make sense of it. So you want to think you probably have about 3 to 5 seconds to do that. Well, you want to think about your visual aids in the same way. So you want to think about each one of your individual slides as a mini billboard, a mini billboard that is going to tell a story on each slide. So some of the things that you want to think about with that is your audience members are going to view that slide, and they're going to take 3 to 5 seconds to make sense of the information on it, and then they're going to refocus their attention back on your voice or back on you. Let's say we were doing this live, they would focus back on you if you're standing in front of them. So if the person who's viewing your presentation has to take more than 3 to 5 seconds to decipher the information that's on your slide, that means a couple of different things. One, there's too much going on your slide. Maybe it's too much text, maybe it's too many images, whatever that may be. And two, there's too many messages happening at the same time. So in order to kind of like get rid of all of that extra stuff and just have that focus of one message per slide, you want to make sure that when you look at your slides, that's okay, this is what I want to say with this slide. This is how I'm going to, simplify it as much as possible. And you want to think about that with each one of your slides. Because if you've ever, you're driving down the highway, you see that billboard, it usually has some sort of image on it to catch your attention, and then it has some sort of name, like the name of a company or, the name of a person if it's trying to advertise a person's business, and then it has some sort of contact information. So it has like, say the name of an attorney and then the attorney's website or the attorney's phone number or something along those lines. So it's a very limited amount of information because that person who designed that billboard knows that you have a very short amount of time to view that billboard, make sense of it, and remember the information that's on it. So think about your visual aids in that way of your audience members have, our brains are trying to work as efficiently as possible. So our brains don't want to spend a ton of time listening to a person's voice and reading the information that's on a slide and combining that all together. We're going to take, unfortunately, the way our brains are designed, we take the easiest way out, right? The path of least resistance, for lack of a better term. And you want to create the path of least resistance for your audience members. So make it easy for them to understand your information and to remember your information as well. So we're going to give you some kind of guidelines to help facilitate that for your audience members. So how many of us are guilty of going into PowerPoint? Let's see, I'll open up PowerPoint here and I'll share my screen with you guys again in just a second. How many of us our instructor has given us some sort of, hey, I want you to do a presentation on climate change. And you're like, okay, cool. I'll do a presentation on climate change. And your first instinct is to just go into PowerPoint and you got your screen looking like this and you're just like, oh, I'm going to go in here and see what I can do with one of these templates that we have here. So you have all these templates that are hanging out and you go in here and we're like, I'm doing mine on climate change. Let's do this green one because, thinking about green and the environment and that sort of thing. So that goes with my theme. I'm just going to go with this one. I want you guys to avoid that temptation and I want you to just go in here and open this blank template. Just default to the blank template and start building from there. That's what I want you guys to do. So as it says there on the screen, skip the stock template. It looks boring. We've seen it 1,000 times before. Skip the stock template and start with a blank template and build out from there. Make something that's going to be unique to you. Make something that's not going to, look cookie cutter like everyone else is going to have. Okay. So skip that stock template, and I guarantee your presentation will be more creative and more looking like it's coming from you personally, something that has a unique spin to it. So that's my first recommendation. Next is with text. So of course the slide on the left hand side is very exaggerated, but you don't want to use more than 6 lines of text and no more than 20 words per slide. That's kind of like the rules of thumb when it comes to students like to have numbers. They have those strict guidelines. But Professor Irisari and I have seen great presentations that have no text whatsoever. We've seen great presentations that have a very limited amount of text as well. The rule of thumb when it comes to text is if you're going to be saying it out loud, you do not have to have the words on the slide, okay? That redundancy, it doesn't help our logic would make us think that if a person is hearing it and a person is seeing it, that the person is going to absorb it. But actually, research has shown that when a person is reading something and they're hearing it at the same time, it actually equates to them not remembering any of it. So keep that in mind. The information that you have on the slides, make sure that you're using the least amount of text possible, and make sure that like I said, if you're going to be saying it out loud, that it doesn't need to be on the slides. So for example, an example of this would be a student in their introduction is talking about their personal inspirations, and then on the screen it'll have a title that says my personal inspirations. Well, I'm telling you out loud that here are some images of my personal inspirations. I don't need to have that written out on each individual slide, like a title on each slide that tells you what this slide is about, because I'm going to be telling you with my voice, right? So you want to use your visual aid as just that, something that's going to visually aid, visually enhance your presentation, and not, bog it down with a lot of extra text and things that's going to distract the audience, okay? Next is to ditch the bullet points. So trying to find really creative ways to go about, maybe there is something that you want to list out on your slides. Maybe you want to list out the different types of software that you've been trained to use in your industry. And you're like, oh, I know how to use Photoshop, and I know how to use Illustrator, and I know how to use InDesign, like I know how to use all these Adobe products or whatever it may be. And so maybe instead of listing those out in bullet points, like typing out Photoshop, typing out Illustrator, maybe you're using the logo, like images of those logos for each one of those softwares. Or you're using a visual representation of the thing that you're talking about rather than having those like boring old bullet points that show up on the screen. That's just a recommendation to use, and just a way to like add some more creativity to your presentation, add some more visual interest to your presentation as well. We want to ditch the serif fonts. So serif fonts are a serif, if you're not familiar with typography. Serifs are those little feet that are on the bottom of the font here that's on the left-hand side, excuse me. And this font looks like, like a Times New Roman, like something that you'd type out an essay with, right? And so serif fonts are actually made for heavy reading. So if I'm going to be doing a lot of reading, I want it to be in a serif font because my eye can guide from line to line very quickly. That's what those little feet are for, essentially. But in our presentations, we don't want our reader or our audience just reading lines and lines of text. We want them to get the information as quickly as possible. And one way to do that is use a sans serif font, which are those blockier fonts. You usually see them used in like advertising. They're used on any kind of text that's on a television commercial, those sorts of things, because we can, a couple of reasons. One, high contrast with your background. That they can help with that contrast, and also they're easier to read. They're just easier to read, and they stand out more than a serif font, especially when used in conjunction with some contrast. Like for example, this slide on the right got a black background, white font, high contrast there, and you'll see some other examples of that as well. Make sure you're sizing everything appropriately, whether it be images or the text that you're using on your slides. If you choose to use text on your slides, just making sure that everything is sized appropriately. and we're not having to get out our magnifying glass or our bifocals to read something that's on one of your slides or see something that's in an image. And that's important to note too of using high quality images and using high resolution images, because if you use something that's super pixelated, it's going to be really difficult to see on the screen. So you just want to make sure that you're using high quality images as well. This is what I was talking about before with the contrast. So making sure that you're maintaining contrast between the text and the background. That's just to help your audience members out, so they're not having to like squint or I don't know if you guys have ever seen a presentation where someone uses like a dark blue background with like orange or red text on top of it, and your eyes are like, it looks like it's kind of like pulsating on the screen, and that can be really distracting. So you want to make sure that you're not running into that issue with your slides either. Um, Sticking to a color palette, this kind of holds true with your, not only with this we're talking about with text too, but with your presentation as a whole. You want it to have some sort of feeling behind it, right? So if I'm doing my presentation on opening my own yoga studio, I'm probably going to use like blues and greens and pastel colors and really like airy, earthy, light colors, right? But if I want to talk about going on, like being a tour manager for a heavy metal band, I might be using dark grays and blacks and reds and navy blues and things like that. So stick to a color palette that's going to represent not only you, but the industry that you want to get into as well. So that'll just kind of set the mood and set the tone for your entire presentation. And this is what I mentioned before about the contrast. So our eyes are drawn to things that are different. So, you know, most of the text on this screen on the right is white, and the text that we've been using throughout has been white. But then with this slide, I change it up and I make some of it yellow. And then that tells your brain that, oh, something's different on this screen. I better pay closer attention to the things that are yellow, because it's a signaling color. It brings your attention towards the things that are different on that slide. So, as you can see on the left-hand slide, just that boring old, you know, serif font with the the not very high contrast, with that templated background looking really boring there on that left-hand side. And then this is what I mentioned before when talking about the billboard rule, is talking about telling too many stories on one slide, like one message per slide, right? On the left-hand side here, we've got 3 different stories going on. We got a story about a kitten, a whale, a post-apocalyptic world. Like, we've got a lot of stuff happening on the left-hand side. Maybe that's the story that you want to tell, those, you know, those 3 things happening. Divide those out into 3 separate slides, okay? That's definitely what we want to do. And of course, another thing too, they're kind of layered, the images are layered on top of one another, and they're layered on top of that templated background. It's just breaking a lot of different rules right there. So what I would recommend is taking each one of these images and making them full screen, or taking the images, and like we have here on the right hand side, you know, blocking out part of the slide for maybe some text or something along those lines, and then having that having the image take up a majority of the screen to kind of show that focus and show that interest to your audience members. And then finally, thinking about visual ways to represent information or represent your message. So these 2 slides here say the same thing, right? They both are giving the message of, you know, essentially a majority of California is experiencing severe drought. Now California is on kind of the other side of that, right? I think I probably need to redo this slide and say California is experiencing severe rainfall, severe mudslides, like all the different things that come along with that. But anyway, so California is experiencing severe drought. Like I said, both of these tell the same message, but the one on the right-hand side, I don't know about all of you, but this one's a little bit more visually appealing to me, right? I have the little graph in the middle, that little circle, the little pie circle graph, however you want to call it, and then having that desert-looking background in the back too, and then even that white text that's on the bottom, of California experiencing severe drought, you could even get rid of that too, and just, you're saying that out loud with the verbal message that you're giving, so you could even eliminate that as if you wanted to, and just have that little graph in the middle with the 99.8%. You got your desert background. It really makes an impact. And so that's what I would recommend doing. If you can find a creative visual way to get your message across, that's the way that you want to do it. There was something else I wanted to say about that as well, and now it's leaving me, but it'll come back. So those are some of the main guidelines that you want to follow. We also highly recommend watching, and let me bring it up just a second. Let me freeze my screen. There is a YouTube video called Death by PowerPoint, and we highly recommend watching that as well. I always recommend my face-to-face students watch it too, but also just all my students watch it. It's such a great um, video to watch when it comes to visual aids. Hold on just a second. For some reason, as I've aged, I haven't been able to type and talk at the same time. I don't know if that's like a cognitive ability that becomes less and less easy as you as you get older. Okay, so I'm going to pop it into the chat box right now, the link to that video. So it's called Death by PowerPoint. And I always recommend that my students start at the 5.5-minute mark. You can watch the whole thing if you want. It's just lengthy. It's a little over 20 minutes. So if you start at 5.5 minutes, that's kind of where like the good stuff is. The good part of the video starts. But he really takes you through a lot of what I was talking about today with the keeping one message per slide, but he also takes you into the psychology behind it as well. And no, I wasn't showing YouTube. I was just grabbing the link really quick. But it takes you behind the psychology of why, when you have text on the screen and you're saying it out loud, why do your audience members not remember that sort of thing. So he kind of takes you through some of the psychology of it, and it's just a super interesting video. So we always recommend you guys watch that. And I even learned, I learned when I watched it the first time, I learned so much from it as well. So it's a really valuable asset to have and resource to have as you're going through and building out your visual aids too. So I'm going to skip over that for right now, but a couple of things we want to just kind of close out with a little bit, kind of some reminders and things like that. Just know that there's always room for improvement. I know when we talk about feedback, it can be a little bit scary, and Professor Irizarry did a really great job of taking you through the RISE model and talking about staying positive when it comes to feedback and that sort of thing. But I know there can be some anxiety around it. So just, keep in mind that we're all here to help each other improve, and that, I know, and this, with me too, I kind of personally struggle with this, with getting criticism and getting critiques and things like that, where if I was in your shoes and I was, posting I'm all done with my first draft of my presentation, this is so great, and then I post it to the discussion board, and then someone comes in and is like, slide 3 is a little weak, I think that you need to go back in and revamp that one or whatever, it's probably gonna bum me out a little bit. I'm gonna be like, oh, I worked so hard on that. This sucks that someone else doesn't think it's as great as I do, or whatever it may be, right? These things that we tell ourselves. But I want you to go in and read the comments that people leave for you, and read the feedback that people are leaving for you, and think about it as, this person just wants me to do better. Like, this is just to help me improve. So just always keep that in mind as you're going through and reading through the feedback, and also getting feedback from Professor Irizarry and I as well. Just because it's coming from an instructor doesn't doesn't always make it easier to absorb and to implement as well. So here, just kind of a checklist to go through for the first draft, just some things to think about as you're going through, and before you submit your first draft, maybe go through this checklist and make sure that you're kind of you've accomplished all of these things along the way. So just kind of reiterate some of the stuff that Professor Irizarry was talking about before. Make sure it's 3 to 4 minutes in length. That's the time requirement for the first and final draft of your presentation. We recommend using PowerPoint pages, slides, if you're a Mac person, or Adobe Spark. Those are the ones that a majority of students use. Sometimes there's a person who uses something different than that, but that's usually what people use. Or excuse me, Google Slides is what I was referring to with that. Pages is, or Keynote is what for Mac that I forgot to put in there. Pages, instead of Pages, it should say Keynote. That's why I'm looking at that and having this like cognitive dissonance with it. It must be audio and visual, so we need to have you guys submit this as a video, okay? We want to see see your visuals, hear your audio together. We've had some students in the past who will just submit a PowerPoint presentation. That's not what we're looking for. I've had students in the past submit just like a PDF of their slides. That's not what we're looking for. I've had students submit like a PDF of their slides and then a separate audio file. That's not what we're looking for. We need to have these two things together in a push-to-play format, okay? Limit the amount of text on slides. So that's, just going over those visual aid guidelines, and also incorporating the stuff that you learn in your reading, also incorporating that death by PowerPoint video. All of these different resources together can be really helpful with that. You don't want to read from your slides or from a script. That's another thing too. We can tell within 5 seconds of you doing a presentation that you're reading from a script or not. So making sure that you're not reading directly from a script. You can use a script as you're kind of building out your presentation and kind of mapping it out. A lot of students, what they'll do is they'll take their presentation plan, and then they'll turn that into like a script of what they want to say. And then what they'll do is they'll practice that script over and over again, kind of learn the content of it, and then get rid of the script, do your presentation from memory. Not like memorized words, but memory of the content, okay? So it sounds natural, it sounds conversational, and that sort of thing. Push-to-play format, like we said before, you can upload it to YouTube and then submit a YouTube link, or you can submit the video link, whichever one that you prefer. Use high quality full screen images. Make sure those images are like a high resolution, high quality, so we can see them. They're not going to become all pixelated on our screen. Include your own work if you have it. Like if you have your own music, you have your own sketches, you have your own, game levels that you've created, whatever it may be, share that in your presentation. We want to see it, no matter how, people get really down on themselves about, oh, my sketches aren't that great, or these characters I developed, they're really rough, I don't want to know if I want to share them with us. We both are excited to see all of that stuff. So make sure you submit the assignment on time, of course, and then get your peer feedback in the discussion board. One other thing to keep in mind with the discussion board is most students don't do their initial post to the discussion board until Sunday. So some students, they'll send us a message and they'll say, no one has interacted on the discussion board and it's almost Sunday. Well, most students don't complete the first draft of their presentation until Sunday when they're going to submit it. So if you don't see much activity, wait until Sunday or early next week, and then go in and start watching other students' presentations and leaving them feedback there. So might just have to wait until Sunday or a little bit later. And then a couple of other things that I want to mention that I don't have on here, but just things to keep in mind when it comes to the format of your presentation is, yes, we want it to be a video that you submit, but a couple of things. And not to pick on the gamers out there, but we don't like the image in image videos where it's like a video of gameplay in the background, and then there's like a little rectangle with your face in it on the bottom that's like narrating the whole thing, and you're speaking like that. We're not looking for anything like that. We're also not looking for just a video, kind of the typical student sitting at their computer desk, they have a headset on, and they're staring at a computer screen reading from a script, and they're recording themselves. That's not what we're looking for either. We're looking for either slides with audio narration over them, or a combination of slides and video. So you can include video of you speaking, but if you're going to be doing that, make sure that you don't have a headset on. Make sure that it's you sitting or standing in front of like a plain background, as little distraction as possible. And you can do it that way as well. So I don't want your presentations to just be 3 to 4 minutes of like gameplay as your visuals, and then you just narrating over that. We need to have some still images in there too to add in variation. And it shows us that you have the skills to create a visual presentation, okay? That's what we're going to be gauging your success on, and that's what we're gauging your grade on as well, is a couple of things. The storytelling, of course, and can this person put together visuals that aid in their storytelling? So that's what we're looking for with that, okay? Yes, Professor Urisari is saying be careful of background music. We really like background music. I think that presentation's enhanced by background music, but make sure it's not too like louder than your voice. I don't want your presentation to sound like you're constantly trying to yell over music, or I can't hear your voice because your music is too loud over it, right? Um, no. So Austin is saying, can I submit 4 minutes of me shit talking kids on Halo? Nope. You're gonna keep that for your Twitch account or YouTube streaming or whatever the kids are doing these days. I don't know. I need to keep more up to date with that one, but nope, that's not going to be acceptable. Although we probably had students do it in the past, not so much like that, but that's the other thing too. Austin, you actually bring a good point that I'll reiterate too. You don't want to say negative things about the company that you want to work for. So let's say, for example, you want to work for Bethesda Studios and you don't want to be like, hey, Bethesda, I want to work for you because I think your games suck and I want to make them better. Or, hey, Bethesda, I want to work at your, I want to work for you and this game that you had come out, it was pretty good, but here's the ways that you can make it better. You don't want to do that. You never want to bring down the company that you're trying to work for. Also saying their games do suck. Well, I just choose Bethesda because I just know the name. I have no affiliation with any gaming company. I know the least about gaming of everyone probably on this webinar right now. I'm not very good at it. So my gaming expertise ended with the original Nintendo, and then a Game Boy after that, and that was about it for me. But anyway, so you don't want to trash talk the company that you want to work for or tell them that what they're doing is bad and how you're going to help them improve it. You want to be more eloquent about the way that you do say that. So there's always ways to say that, hey, I think that you can improve these certain things, but you want to be more tactful. Tactful is probably the word, so tactful, yep. Okay, so we are going to officially end it there when it comes to like the official lecture, and then we're going to open it up for questions and answers. So if you guys do have any questions, you can either raise your hand, put them in the chat box, whatever you'd like to do. We're going to hang out for a while. If you don't have any questions, you are free to go. But if you want to hang out for a little while, that's cool too. So we will head to the chat box.
George, I can see that you have typed in, should I narrate a story excerpt? Maybe you can clarify for us what you mean by a story excerpt.
He raised his hand, so I'm going to unmute him, and then George, maybe you can explain to us a little bit more in depth. Okay, George, you're unmuted if you want to speak with us. Oh, no. Okay. Maybe. George, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. Basically, my thought was including an excerpt from a story as part of the presentation.
In what context?
Well, like if I do like an introduction and I have a specific concept I'm illustrating and it's illustrated in a story.
Oh, so you want to tell like a story? Okay, so tell about like you're explaining yourself as like a character in a story type
right.
of situation. Oh yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really creative way to do that. Especially, are you a gaming person or a creative writing person?
Creative writing.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. That goes along with the industry you want to get into, and that's you could actually do if you wanted to. You could do your entire presentation in story format if you wanted to. But yeah, I think that's a great way to introduce yourself and talk about yourself.
You mean like narrate the presentation as if it were a story?
You could do that. Yeah, absolutely. You could, you could talk about yourself in third person, like you're talking about a character within a story, if you wanted to.
Okay. Thank you.
I think that sounds great. Yeah, no problem. Let's see.
Cage, I can see that you are asking, do we have a recommendation for the order in which you should complete your assignments for this week? I would say that this week, of course, complete your reading assignment, post to that discussion board about the visual aids, and then get directly to work on this first draft of this assignment. I know that all of you know from last week that it does take a little while to create a really good quality audio visual presentation. And the better job you do on the first draft, the less revisions you'll have to make for the final draft. And as we've said a couple times now, the discussion board, the peer feedback discussion board, that'll tend to get more active around Sunday. So if you're ahead on that and you can post early, that's fantastic. But most of the students in both classes will be starting to post closer to the weekend. Oh, Cage, you're welcome.
Yeah, and you don't have to wait for our feedback in order to start your first draft. Because Professor Irisari and I don't normally like read a plan, like read a presentation plan and be like, no, this whole thing has to be redone. Um, Anytime that a person doesn't get a perfect grade on a presentation plan, it's because they didn't provide enough information. So usually the general idea or the general direction that you're going into is right. So you can head in that direction with the first draft. And then our feedback is going to be, hey, you need to include this. I think you need to expand upon this a little bit more. So it's just going to be kind of like you need to include more rather than, oh yeah, that job that you want isn't going to work out. So no, it's not going to be like that. It's just going to be adding more content. So you could absolutely start your presentation without our feedback. We are going to give you feedback, of course, but you could start working on it while we're working on getting you guys the feedback, of course. You have any other questions? Just in time for it to start hurricaning outside. It's it's that time of day. I feel like as soon as it hits 3 o'clock, all hell breaks loose outside my window. Oh, it's snowing where Austin is. That's fun.
Austin, where are you? Every afternoon in Florida, we tend to get some rain.
Yeah, I'll take the hurricane rains instead of snow though. So, oh, in Colorado, yeah. Great.
I've only seen snow once, and I was 25 before I saw snow ever.
Yeah. Well, I lived in upstate New York for 19 years of my life, so I lived in I don't know. We had snow sometimes all the way up to the power lines. Like,
Whoa.
yeah, absolutely. After the plow trucks would come through and they'd push the snow from either side of the road, it would pile all the way up to the power lines.
That is very intimidating, although I do know how to drive in a rainstorm.
I know, yeah, that's true. I think driving in rain is more treacherous.
Really? I mean, I know how to drive through hydroplaning. Unfortunately, that is an acquired skill in Florida if you commute on the highway. Not that I'm suggesting it.
Right. Whoa, 440 inches. That's crazy. I think it's funny that you're counting it in inches rather than feet. I don't even know what that is in feet. Let's see.
Austin, I wonder if you can surf really well if you have skiing experience.
Wow, that's almost 40 feet of snow. 36 and a half feet of snow. That's craziness.
Wow. Well, everyone, we're happy to stay on and talk about the weather, but if you have any other questions about the homework, we can answer those too.
Maryland has moods. I've heard that before, actually. That's funny that you say that. Maryland has moods.
At least with hurricanes, we usually get at least some notice. So
Yeah,
at least we can, stock up. James, great question. You said if the first draft is good enough, can we use it as the final as well? Unfortunately, the answer is a definite no. You absolutely must make some changes from the first draft to revise for the final draft submission.
Yeah.
And how we grade.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
I was just gonna say we get a unicorn once in a while. Call it a unicorn. We get a unicorn once in a while of a student who just like submits a flawless, just perfect presentation, and it's amazing. That happens once in a while. But even those presentations that you see on the playlist that we shared, those went through a revision process. So, um, it happens rarely that we get one that's like, okay, this is final. I can't say any more about this. This is final ready, but 99.9% of them definitely go through the revision process. Excuse me.
I've had one in the past
Yeah.
year, I will say. One
Yeah.
one in a year, and we have a new class every month. Um,
Yeah.
so just plan on making revisions. Just keep that in mind as you're going throughout, because it is a great way to learn. And perfect presentations in the whether they're online or face to face, they almost don't exist. There's usually some area for improvement.
Yeah. But it also, that is something that you want to think about too, because we've had students in the past who are like, who I'm not saying that James is trying to do this, but just kind of a forewarning for everyone who try to like resubmit their first draft again for the final draft, and they think that we're not going to catch it. For some reason, I can watch a presentation in week 3 and then watch it again and watch the person's resubmission in week 4, and I know what they changed. Like, for some reason, I can just remember the presentation and I look at it again and I'm like, okay, they fixed this, they fixed that, like that looks good, whatever. So I can see it. So don't think that anyone out there can just like resubmit their first draft for week 4 and that we won't catch it, because we will catch it. We
Yeah,
will
I find the same thing. I have surprisingly good recall of the first draft presentations when I'm grading the final. I will tell you, all of you, to also keep in mind that the grade that you receive on the first draft, that is a grade for a first draft, not necessarily the same grade that you would receive had you turned in that first draft as the final presentation. I had a student a few months ago who turned in a solid first draft. And then he emailed me and said, I'm not going to make any revisions. I'm just turning this in as the final draft. To which I told him many times, you have to make some revisions in order to get a grade for the final draft. You have to address the feedback that we've given you. And he just absolutely refused. And so unfortunately, it is the policy here at Full Sail that if you don't make any revisions, you don't address the feedback we're giving you, that you do get a 0 on that final draft, and that is a big portion of your final grade in the course. But that's rare. It's rare that we have students that don't make any revisions. Do we have any other questions so far?
Okay. We're at 3:10 right now, so I think we're gonna close it down. If you guys have any more questions, of course you can message us and ask us those, and we will get back to you with answers. But I think we're good to go right now. We will be sending out our follow-up messages with the link to this and yeah, the link to this afternoon. So look out for that as well if you ever want to go back and review anything that we went over today. So good luck with your first drafts of your presentations, and we look forward to seeing them all.